the science that made reversal impossible. It did not arrive as a point of no return. It arrived as convenience. Each step forward made the next step easier until going back stopped being practical. The transition was invisible precisely because it felt like improvement. Nobody builds a trap that looks like a trap. The best ones look like progress. To understand why this matters now, we need to look at how reversibility once protected society. Mistakes could be corrected. Policies could be repealed. Technologies could be abandoned. Progress was risky, but rarely permanent. The ability to undo was not a luxury, but a structural feature of how civilizations learned. Trial and error only works when error is recoverable, and for most of human history, it was. That safeguard eroded as systems intertwined. Infrastructure depended on software. Software depended on data. Data depended on behavior. Each layer reinforced the next. Undoing one meant unraveling all. The architecture of modern life became a lattice of mutual dependency so dense that removing any single element threatened the integrity of the whole. At first, this felt like integration. Efficiency improved. Friction vanished. Systems synchronized. But synchronization has a cost. When everything depends on everything else, reversal threatens collapse. The very quality that made integrated systems powerful, their interconnection, was also what made them irreversible. Strength and rigidity became indistinguishable. The earliest warning signs were subtle. Temporary solutions became permanent. Experimental tools became critical infrastructure. Opting out required rebuilding entire systems from scratch. What had been introduced as provisional quietly became foundational, not because anyone decided it should, but because the cost of replacing it grew faster than the will to do so. Science enabled this shift by making transitions smooth but exits steep. Forward motion was incremental. Backward motion was catastrophic. The asymmetry grew quietly. Every advance was designed for adoption, not for departure. The engineering of entry was meticulous. The engineering of exit was neglected, because no one funds the path back from a destination everyone wants to reach. Reversal did not disappear by accident. It was engineered out in the name of stability. And once a system makes reversal too costly to consider, choice does not vanish. It becomes theoretical. As reversibility faded, commitment hardened. Systems were no longer evaluated by whether they were right, but by whether they were embedded deeply enough to be unavoidable. Depth of integration became a proxy for legitimacy. The more entangled a system was with everything around it, the more permanent it appeared, and permanence was mistaken for proof of value. This changed how decisions were made. Risk assessments focused on adoption, not exit. Success was measured by integration. The more a system spread, the safer it was assumed to be, simply because removing it would be disruptive. The logic was circular but effective. Systems that were hard to remove were treated as essential, and systems treated as essential attracted further integration, making them harder still to remove. The conflict emerged when early assumptions aged poorly. Conditions changed. Values shifted. What once made sense no longer did. But the systems built on those assumptions remained, locked in place by dependence. The world around them evolved while they stayed fixed, creating a growing mismatch between the reality they were designed for and the reality they now inhabited. In technology, platforms became ecosystems. In science, methods became standards. In policy, temporary frameworks became permanent architecture. Reversal was technically possible, but practically unthinkable. The distinction between impossible and unthinkable became the defining feature of irreversibility. Nothing prevented retreat except the certainty that retreat would be devastating. The emotional tension rose as people realized something unsettling. The future was being shaped by past decisions that could no longer be revisited. Choice had an expiration date. The window for reconsideration closed silently, sealed by accumulating dependencies that no one had tracked and no one could easily map. This created a new form of power. Not control over what comes next, but control over what cannot be undone. Influence moved to those who acted earliest, not those who understood most clearly. The first mover advantage was no longer merely commercial. It was existential, because being first meant embedding your assumptions into the foundation of everything that followed. The science that made reversal impossible did not remove freedom outright. It delayed the cost of choice until correction became too expensive to attempt. And by the time that cost was visible, momentum had already done its work. The conflict reached its peak when systems designed for permanence began facing conditions they were never meant to endure. What could not be reversed also could not adapt. The rigidity that had been mistaken for stability revealed itself as brittleness when the world shifted beneath it. When assumptions broke, systems strained instead of adjusting. Workarounds piled up. Exceptions became rules. Complexity grew as patching replaced redesign. Stability was maintained by constant effort rather than resilience. The resources that should have gone toward innovation were consumed by the maintenance of structures that no longer fit their context, but could not be removed without unacceptable disruption. Engineers recognized the danger immediately. Irreversibility concentrates risk. When a system cannot be rolled back, every error must be carried forward. Small flaws become structural. Temporary fixes harden into permanent fragility. The accumulation of workarounds created a kind of institutional scar tissue, functional enough to maintain operation, but too rigid to allow genuine healing. The emotional peak arrived with a realization that felt deeply unfair. Those living with the consequences were not the ones who had made the original choices. Reversal was impossible, but responsibility remained. The burden fell on people who had never consented to the commitments that now constrained them. People who inherited a world shaped by decisions they could neither endorse nor undo. This created institutional paralysis. Acknowledging failure meant admitting there was no clean exit. Silence became safer than correction. Maintenance replaced innovation. The culture of forward motion that had created the problem became incapable of addressing it, because addressing it required the one thing the culture could not provide: the willingness to go back. Irreversibility did not just lock systems in place, it locked conversation in place. When nothing can be undone, questioning feels pointless. Debate fades, progress continues, but only along a narrowing path. The range of acceptable discussion contracts to match the range of available action, and both shrink together until the only questions left are technical ones about how to maintain what already exists. The science that made reversal impossible had not removed error. It had removed the ability to learn from it. The resolution did not come from undoing what could not be undone. It came from redesigning how permanence itself was treated. Scientists and engineers began prioritizing reversibility as a core principle, not an afterthought. The shift was philosophical before it was technical. A recognition that the measure of a good system is not just how well it performs, but how gracefully it can be retired. Systems were rebuilt with exit paths. Modular structures replaced monoliths. Dependencies were loosened. Change was slowed enough to allow retreat without collapse. Progress was judged not only by adoption, but by the cost of reversal. The new standard demanded that every commitment carry within it the blueprint for its own unwinding. This marked a profound shift in values. Permanence was no longer proof of success. Flexibility became strength. The ability to step back was recognized as a form of intelligence. The systems that earned the deepest trust were not the ones that could never be removed, but the ones that could be removed without catastrophe. The deeper lesson was uncomfortable but necessary. A future that cannot be revised is not stable. It is fragile. True resilience requires the possibility of correction, even when correction is inconvenient. A world that cannot change its mind is not a world that has found the truth. It is a world that has foreclosed the search. The science that made reversal impossible forced humanity to confront a hard truth. Freedom does not vanish when choices are made. It vanishes when choices can no longer be reconsidered. And the most responsible systems are not the ones that move forward fastest. They are the ones that leave the door open behind them. Sometimes the smallest shift in perspective becomes the beginning of a new future.